All right. I met the speaker today a couple of months ago at a business retreat. We were off in Kent, I think it was. We were in the woods together, as well as a few other people, obviously. It was an entrepreneur mastermind thing for the weekend. And we had an amazing conversation. And the intro that Michia said to me was along the lines of, "Hi, I'm Michia. When I was in my 20s, I started a software company, and I recently sold it for 110 million. And I was like, okay. I know who my next podcast guest is. So without further ado, can we give a massive round of applause for my friend, Michia Rohrssen. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Cool. I hopefully got that intro correct.
Nailed it.
Okay, amazing. So we're going to do a couple of questions, which I'm sure you'll find interesting, all about the journey of starting, building, and then hopefully one day exiting a company. And I'm keen to make this as interactive as possible. So we'll go on for about half an hour, but then we'll do Q&A at the end as well. And if you have a question, now is the time to start thinking about it and then asking it at the end. Don't wait until afterwards and then DM him on Instagram or something. I'm sure you're drowning in people on there, right?
I do my best.
Okay, cool. So let's kick it off. So when you were 31, you sold your company for $110 million. Now, you have said that this is both the best thing and the worst thing to ever happen to you, which I imagine is a good problem to have, but I understand, not firsthand, but I can empathize kind of with perhaps some of the stress and pressure that comes with that. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what you mean? Why is it the best thing and the worst thing to ever happen to you?
Yeah. Selling the company for 110 at 31. Good sound, everybody? Yeah, so selling the company for 110 million at 31 was, in many ways, I watched all of my life dreams come true overnight. And it's a good place to be, but it's a place where all of a sudden you're 31 and you sort of wonder, okay, what's next? What now? And it really, you hear the stereotypes on like founders that go through this journey and they end up super depressed after the exit. And I think the reason all the successful founders that sell their companies sort of go through that depressive phase, and I went through it too for a couple of years trying to figure out what's next. If I could actually turn this into maybe a lesson for someone rather than just my sob story on boohoo sold it for 110, was that the reason I was able to sell it for 110 was because, for better or worse, my identity was wrapped up in the company. And so I think there's a reason that most founders that achieve that level of success end up sort of depressed after they sell it, is because it's what it takes to get there, which is, it was all I thought about. I was on vacation with my wife, who's back here hanging out, or at the company, I was still thinking about the company. And when you lose that, it's sort of like, what's next? What do I do now that this thing that I have been singularly obsessed with for a decade is, I've done it. I've checked all the boxes. What's next? And that's ultimately how, I don't know, some of you follow me on Instagram, and I really appreciate that. That's how I got into content, because I was like, I think what's next for me is actually not to build another company and just make more money. I want to try to help others do that. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Okay, I love the word obsessed there, because there seems to be a lot of talk in startup world about trying to build a company but doing it on a 4-day work week or doing it part-time or something. And I'm probably going to piss off a few people by saying this, but I personally don't think that's possible when your competition is working 7 days a week. Yep. You might disagree, you might agree. What are your takes on people that want to achieve massive success without obsession?
I don't think they want it. Like, it's just, I think for me, building the company and becoming successful was something that I wanted so bad that I can't even imagine saying, but I'm only going to do it 4 days a week. And it's not to say that I worked, 9 to 9 every day. Actually, at my company, we were really diligent about the founders not being in the office after 5:30 p.m. We were like, listen, the founders are going to go home. We're going to have dinner with our girlfriends or our wives, and we may work afterwards, but you're not going to see us in the office at midnight, because we didn't want that company culture of like, everyone's here till midnight and you have to stay there, because it burns people out. But whether or not I was in the office, whether or not I was on the weekend, I was always obsessing over the company. And I think that is really, I genuinely don't think you could do it without that. I wish you could. It would have made my life a lot easier, but I don't think you can do it.
How much of that is down to that burning desire to achieve that vision? Because a lot of people are great at the what, they're great at the how, but they suck at the why, and they can't formulate that plan in their mind and inspire an army to follow them on that journey, whether that's employees, whether that's customers, whether that's investors, whether that's your audience. How important is vision in comparison to the other aspects of business?
So I think there's maybe two kinds of vision. There's the broad, like, we're going to change the world vision, our product's going to be a revolution. And I think setting a vision for your team matters. You want to have something that you're working towards and things like that. But then you also need an internal vision for why are you doing it. And I think, if anything, I was probably okay at setting like this grand vision for the team on like where we're going, but I had a really strong personal vision. And I'm full drinking the Kool-Aid on the vision boards and everything. So literally, when I was running the company, at one point, over my bed, I had 9 posters. And it was like, this is the car that I'm going to buy when we sell. This is the amount that I want us to sell for. I had a picture of this rooftop bar in Bangkok that like we're going to go to when all that stuff. And I've been to the bar, I bought the car, like I did it all. But I used to look at it every night and just like, first thing I see before I go to bed, first thing I see when I wake up. And I think that vision on sort of, this is what my life could look like. I would think about that when I was like, well, I need to make 100 sales calls today. Or I've pitched 100 investors and they've all said no, and I need to go find 50 more investors that might give me a chance. So I think the biggest thing I was worried about, probably rightfully so, was my conviction as a CEO in myself. And I was really worried that might give out because I watched it happen to my peers. I'd go to I was part of a startup accelerator called Alchemist, and it was in San Francisco. And we had to go down to Palo Alto to like go to the events, and then we go back up to San Francisco. And you would always carpool because it's like an hour. And I would be in those cars, and sort of people would be like talking about how their fundraise was going, but then they'd also be like, but did you see that Amazon's hiring for 220 like right now? Like, I'm kind of thinking about it. And you would watch founders give up before their company actually died. And I was really worried about doing that because I was like, if that happens, there's no way it's going to work. So I was really focused on trying to convince myself this is going to suck, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, I see a lot of people that have that plan B, they have that plan C, and in reality, you just need to burn the boats, because if you're giving yourself a plan B, you're giving yourself a reason and permission to fail. There's no reason to have a plan B because it distracts from plan A, basically. And it's a cheesy, famous story, but the concept of the general going to the island and then burning all of the boats so his soldiers can't go back and they have to take the island or they lose. There's a lot of truth to that in reality.
There is. Can I give one caveat to that? Because I think half the audience is a founder. When I was like seeing hands, half are not founders, but you're here to start up an event, so maybe you want to be founders one day. I actually think what was really useful for us is we didn't immediately quit our jobs when we wanted to start a company. We said, we're going to validate the idea and then we'll quit. And that allowed us to, one, save up cash. We saved up about close to 12 months of cash. But then we also, when we quit, we were able to quit with conviction and say, now there's no plan B, because we spent time at our current companies validating the idea. And that meant talking to customers, pitching them, and we actually quit as we sort of were getting customers to sign LOIs, saying, if you go build that thing that you promised you're going to build, then we'd be interested in buying. It's non-binding, but we said, this is enough for us to have full conviction and actually leave the jobs so we're not worried about plan B. And it was hard for me. But my co-founder had just sold a company to Dropbox, and he left 3 months before he vested the sale of his company. But he could do it because we had conviction in what we were building. And obviously, it worked out okay.
Okay, that sounds like you put a lot of thought into that kind of decision making. Now, you famously said that one of the best things that helped you on your startup journey was getting really, really good at decision making, which seems obvious, but in reality, most people just make decisions on a whim or on gut or emotion. Maybe gut is quite important, but what do you mean when you say this?
I think that just, if you look at the economy today, it's very clear that the way that you get ahead in life is not by doing more like physical labor. We're not a production society. The people that get ahead most in life are the people that make the best decisions. And so I think it's really important to look at decision making like a skill. And if you believe it's a skill, not a sort of just like God-given talent, then you can also believe that you can get better at it. And so my advice is really start actually looking at your skill of decision making and doing a retro. I do it every 12 months. I go back and I essentially look at the big decisions that I've made in life. And I look back and I say, were these the right or wrong decisions? Now that I can look back 12 months later, was that actually the right decision, or should I have done something differently? And more importantly, because you're going to make wrong decisions, I really try and define the lesson. So like an early version of this was I lost $5,000 buying Tron dogs, which was like a Crypto Puppies knockoff in like 2017, 18 or something. And I was able to go back and say, why did I actually lose that $5,000? Like I've just paid $5,000. What's the lesson that my $5,000 has gotten me? And it was like, well, there were actually no good fundamentals to this business. I didn't do the research. I just jumped in because of the hype and because I was in Silicon Valley and everyone was buying this kind of stuff. And that lesson, I did that pre-exit. So it was really nice to lose the $5,000 and not the millions that I play with now on that same lesson. So I think it's important, especially early on, to make the mistakes when they're small so you can make fewer mistakes and better decisions when you're making larger decisions.
Yeah, I've definitely made that mistake of buying JPEG apes and that sort of thing as well. I'm sure we all have. Okay, so I think there's a thread that I'd like to pull at there, and you mentioned around these tiny decisions can have huge impacts later on, and I think that really comes down to like trajectory, if that's the right way of saying it, because we don't think it's important when we perhaps pick that degree or that first job or that initial business idea, but then you look back 10 years later and that's what you've been working on that entire time. And of course you can pivot, of course you can iterate, of course you can change, but a lot of people are pretty stubborn, especially entrepreneurs, and we don't. So how important is it to, yes, make good decisions, but be willing to change them and not have an ego that blocks that?
I think the thing that we pivoted a lot. One of my advisors early on joked that we should just rename our company from Prodigy to Pivot because we were like just changing all the time. I think the reason that we were pivoting, and pivot's sort of like a thing that you see in a lot of startups these days. I think people pivot often because what they're doing is not working and they just assume a pivot is the default answer. We were pivoting, well, it might feel like a pivot, but what we were actually doing is we were looking at the data and saying, oh, here's where we missed, and here's where we actually were onto something. And so I actually look at it more as like we were iterating closer to the right decision through the data. And so as it relates to sort of your question on changing your mind, pivoting, there's this quote that I really like, which is, I forget who said it, but it was a meeting and everyone was sharing their opinions. And he was basically like, does anyone have data? Because otherwise opinions are useless. And he was the CEO, so he was like, so otherwise we're going with my opinion. And I really tried to reinforce that in our company, which is like, my personality is not to be the loudest person in the room. It's ironic that I'm the person on stage because I was often the person that least wanted to be on stage in my company. And yet I had to go in front of 200 people and everything. So I really tried to build a culture of, rather than just letting the loudest voice win, let's let the closest and truest data win. And I think when you can disconnect your ego from the data, then you're willing to just do what the data says. I think the ego thing gets in the way a lot. And I think we were just really good at disconnecting our ego from the data.
Yeah, the best ideas should win, best
Yes.
up with the best analytics on that plan, right?
And when you don't have the data, be willing, I think you have to be willing to take a stance, but know that sort of you're going out on a limb and you could be wrong, but like sometimes you do need to put your foot down and say, and it's often usually you should be doing as the CEO saying like, we don't have the data, so I'm making the call here, and if it's wrong, I will also get in front of the company and say, that was wrong, here's why. But there were times when I said, I'm making the call here and we're going this direction, because the buck has to stop with you.
Yeah. I mean, you have to trust your gut sometimes. Like Steve Jobs famously wouldn't do market research because he wanted to create and invent products which people didn't know that they needed. You know, Henry Ford said, you can have any car color that you want as long as it's black. And, you know, those gut decisions, they might seem like they're emotional. They might seem like it's just an opinion. But really, your gut can tell you more data than anything because it's just collecting it over and over time through experience.
Yep. Yeah, your gut often is actually jumping to conclusions on limited data. And I try to be really deliberate about saying, well, what is the data underneath this? And if there is no data, then I have to understand I'm making a bet here, not actually making a data-informed decision. I will say, I think too many people think they're Steve Jobs, and more of them should do market research. Like, actually talk to your customers, because you're probably not Steve Jobs. I was never Steve Jobs, which is why I didn't build a $3 trillion company, but we did okay. So
not yet. Okay. So you did an Instagram post a few weeks ago. It's now at 3 million plus views. You said that if you want to be the first millionaire in your family, you must understand how rich people think.
Yep.
Okay, what do you mean by this?
So, yeah, I mean, the real is essentially if you want to be the first millionaire in your family, you need to understand how rich people think, because it's really based on my own journey. I didn't grow up wealthy. My family divorced when I was 4. Mom declared bankruptcy, went to live with her. And I didn't know how money worked. So there were so many fundamental lessons on how to actually build money and wealth that were just entirely disconnected from me. In the real, I recommended 3 books, which are The Total Recall by Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think it's 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, all written by either hundreds of millions or billionaires. But the real, I think, unpacking, like, the lesson is, it's one thing to get a high-paying job. It's an entirely different thing to build sort of generational wealth. And there are different patterns at play, and I'm a big fan of trying to understand and identify patterns of ultra-successful people. And events like this is sort of where you get that too, where you try to meet with other people and see what they've done. But I get a lot of my lessons from reading autobiographies. And I think if you read enough autobiographies, you start to see patterns, and then you can apply those patterns to your life. So that's why I'm a huge fan of those books and autobiographies in general. I just think you can pull out so much.
Has anybody read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight? It's by show of hands. Yeah,
that was another one. Yeah.
Okay, it's my favorite book of all time.
Yes.
Probably I've read it like 10 times. And then the Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson book is epic as well.
Yes.
Which I did feel like Steve Jobs reading it, which maybe I'm not, but it was certainly got in the zone anyway. Yeah. But I guess what you're hinting at is, if you want to learn something, you can do that yourself and you can learn it the hard way, or you can take somebody's decades and decades of experience that they've compressed down into 200-300 pages and then just spend a few hours reading that book, learning their lessons. Now, it was not as good as doing it yourself, but if you can read a lot of books on a subject, you can learn 10, 20 years of experience within a couple of hours, if that makes sense.
The thing that I really look for in these books, and this is something that I do, so now I do content, and so I think you're having Ali Abdallah on soon. Ali is a friend that I've gotten to meet. And when I was initially hanging out with Ali, I was trying to understand, like, what are the phrases that he uses when we talk about doing YouTube videos? And one of the things he'd say were like, well, ideas are really easy to come up with. And as soon as I realized, like, well, that's just the way he thinks, and I'm here, like, struggling to come up with video ideas, there's just all these mindsets that you don't realize successful people have. And it's one thing when you talk to one person to see their mindsets, to see their beliefs, but when you evaluate enough of them, I try to look at how do they think about the thing that I'm trying to do? What do they focus on? What do they not focus on? What are their beliefs? And I try to internalize those. I think that is more powerful than often the tactical how-tos. I think you need both. And I really spend about equal time on them, tactical how-tos and internal beliefs that I need to adopt.
I had dinner at Ali Abdal's house a few weeks back, and I wanted his feedback on a video that I made, and I showed him 3 seconds of it, and he said, no, it's not good, it's not good. And I was like, you haven't watched it, Ali, like, what are you talking about? It's like the hook, Alfie, it's all wrong. Like, yeah. And I wouldn't have thought that because it's just not in my zone, not in my IP, not in my brain. But he as a master of that craft and in that area, instantly he was able to tell me if the video was going to be good or not. And it's those little 1% improvements that turn out to be the difference between somebody that's average or somebody that's a master.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a similar, my wife has a YouTube channel, and I was hanging out with Ali, and I was walking out the door, and I said, oh, by the way, I just got a thumbnail from my wife. Could you take a look at it? I'd love your feedback. And he said, I think you should tweak this. And her average YouTube video gets like 1,000 views. That one I think is at like 110,000, just because he like looked at the thumbnail for like 5 seconds. So I think that goes back to, he just understands the patterns. And the more you can adapt that on the YouTube game, you'll learn. I think it's the same for all aspects of life.
Yeah. Well, we saw that with your Insta, because since I last met you like a couple of months back, you've just gone for like exponential growth on your gram, which is really cool. And I think the outputs are very, very well reflected by the inputs, because the content you were making when I last saw you, it was really good, but it wasn't like God tier. Yeah. Now the stuff that you're making is like the editing, the tone, the hooks, the story, the clothes, the ability to share. It's on like a new level. So, and you're not reinventing the wheel. It's tiny little improvements, but they add up to create something revolutionary. And it's like who plays golf here? Anyone play golf? Okay, a couple of people. Okay, I used to play a little bit, but I'm not very good. In golf, if you hit a ball like a tiny, tiny little bit off, that ball is going to go somewhere completely different. So you might only need 5% difference in your strategy, but that's going to lead to 500% better outcomes, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think on the content stuff, content's a really interesting journey relative to building a startup, because in a startup, you're sort of heads down. You have no idea if what you're doing is working or not. Well, you know if it's working, but you don't know if it's working relative to what it could be doing. And then you go to these events, and a lot of times you're like, how's it going? And everyone else is crushing it. And you're like, well, I think we're getting crushed. And this kind of feels crappy that everyone else seems to be crushing it. The content game is different in that every post sort of gives you immediate feedback if you're crushing it or not. And I think the reason we've been able to iterate really quickly is because we just upped the volume. We're doing 2 posts a day. I look at the data, what's working, what's not working, and quickly iterate. I think the hard thing actually about building a startup is there's a slower feedback cycle. So it can be harder to build in those 5% changes. It might take 6 months, but it is a game of just constant iteration and improvement.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk personal branding content then for a second, because in 2024, it's an important part of building a business. And company brand is important, but personal brand is 10 times more important, because like I don't know how many people follow like the energy drink Prime on Twitter, but I imagine 100 times more follow Logan Paul, right? So yeah. What about like big names? You did a post where you talked about Ryan Reynolds, who became a billionaire. Now, Ryan Reynolds did not become a billionaire by acting. He became a billionaire by leveraging his personal brand to launch companies. Yes. Why is personal branding so important in business? And why? Tell me a little bit about that example that you shared online.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Ryan Reynolds is now a billionaire. It's not from his acting, but he did something that I think a lot of people overlooked that was really sharp. He basically looked at what he was getting paid per commercial. It's about $1 million per commercial. And he said, well, if they're paying me $1 million, surely the companies paying me $1 million are making more. Why don't we go find out like how much more it actually is? And so he started this company called Maximum Effort. It's based on his Deadpool movies. And he said, we're going to go buy companies, or at least the way he's doing is actually taking equity stakes in companies. And I will run my own ads, get paid nothing, but I'll see if I can increase the brand value. And by doing that, he has gone from getting paid $1 million a commercial. Now his equity value, well, his companies are worth $14 billion. He's a billionaire, and it's because he was able to move up the value chain on that. He's not just sort of the lowest totem, which is getting paid as an advertising person. He's actually an equity owner, and so every effort that he puts in is actually increasing his equity value, which is far more than the $1 million. I think that when it comes to personal brands, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. One of the reasons I think it's so powerful is if you look at the patterns, the way people are. When I started the company when I was 24, I said, I'm going to take a step back and look at how are 24-year-olds making a ton of money today, because that's what I wanted to do. And they were building software companies in Silicon Valley. So I picked up everything I had, moved to Silicon Valley, started a software company. I think the way that people are making money today looks a bit different in that they're building personal brands. And I actually think one of my biggest regrets was not building a personal brand when I was running the company. I was just talking, like, I don't know if I could have done it while I was building the software company, but I do wish I would have invested more in personal brand. The other thing that I think is really important is if your business goes under, and it's like we're all startup founders, that's the reality, not every business is going to make it, your personal brand doesn't go under. So I think you're sort of diversifying you're eliminating your downside risk a little bit. If you can actually build a personal brand as a founder while building your company, I wouldn't make it your full-time gig, but I would have some sort of personal branding activities in there because I think it eliminates a lot of downside risk if this whole startup thing doesn't work out on V1 and you have to move to V2.
Yeah. The last live podcast that we did was with our mutual friend, Timothy Amu. And Timo said something which really struck me. He said, having a personal brand is like bringing a gun to a knife fight. And if you're trying to get customers, if you're trying to get an investor, if you're trying to, beat the competition and win an award or get recognition in the press or whatever, if you've got a personal brand, then, you have a gun. Everybody else has got a knife. Like, the chances that you're going to win as a startup founder, as an entrepreneur, are 10x higher just because you've got a lot of followers and you can make great content. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's just the way the world is moving. And I think that if you ignored it 10 years ago, it's fine. But if you ignore it moving forward, you're just going to think about it differently, you're playing at a disadvantage. Like, there's one way to phrase what you have a gun and you're playing at an advantage. I think you're disadvantaged if you're ignoring the power of a personal brand. Even for generating leads for your business, like, there's so much potential. Even if the content you make is not about your business, people will think, oh, you're a cool founder, therefore I want to do business with whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Where do people start? Who makes content in this room, just by show of hands? Okay, maybe like 10, 20% or something. For the 80% that don't, that are running companies, what could they do in like 30, 60 seconds without giving us a full playbook on every platform? Like, how could they start, and what's the best way in late 2024, early 2025? How can they go from like 0 to, fairly influential as fast as possible? What type of content, what platforms, what would you do if you were starting over?
If I was starting over on the content journey, I would start short form first. I wouldn't go long form because that's too much effort. And the algorithms are not as good as distributing long form, and there's too many layers to master. I would go low production value. I wouldn't worry about cameras. I wouldn't worry about mics. I would just film with my phone. And I would get really good at the first 3 seconds. I will give away some of the secret sauce here because it's really interesting what we've been testing lately. We have some reels that have gone really viral, 1 million views, 2 million views, 3 million views. We sometimes re-record them and change the content but leave the first 3 seconds, or we'll keep the content but completely change the editing, and they actually perform the same almost every time. The only thing that's the same is the performance and the first 3 seconds. So I'd get really good at nailing those first 3 seconds, and I think building that skill, what actually hooks people, I'd work on that, and then I'd focus on everything else. So short form, probably Instagram, TikTok, it's fine, but I would go Instagram, first 3 seconds, practice that skill through repetition, and then you can focus on the many, many layers below. But that's something you could do. A 30-second reel a day on your phone takes you 30 seconds, maybe a minute with a retake, but not that long. Yeah. I would just do that.
Yeah, simple little thing, but it will compound, it will add up, and then in a year you'll achieve more. From year 4 to year 5, you'll gain more growth than years 1 to 4. It's exponential, it compounds.
Yep. First year and a half on socials, I think we were like 2,000 followers, and now like some days we gain way more than that. So it just keeps, and I'm still small, like it's just keep you see the exponential growth curve.
Yeah, I mean, I'm small in the grand scheme of things as well, but we got more views on episode 150 to 170 of the podcast than we did from 1 to 150. So, but most people, they quit before they get to episode 5 or 10 or Reel 27 or TikTok 12 or Instagram 5 or LinkedIn 42. They just quit too early, don't they? And they don't stick it out and go through the pain that's needed to get there.
Yeah. And I think it's actually a skill issue, for myself included. Like the first 6 months on YouTube, we had 198 subscribers after 6 months of a video every week and a short every day. I do think that if I knew what I knew now, I could achieve that sort of in 1 day or 2 days. But it was similar, just like repetition of me getting good at this skill. Now we've published over 500 pieces of content on short form and like 50 videos on long form, and they're starting to work. So.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have been able to do that now if you didn't make all those mistakes leading up to it and learn all those errors.
Totally. I would probably have quit the content if I wasn't so embarrassed that I told everybody this is my thing now. But like I had told all my friends, like, yeah, I'm not going to start another startup. I'm going to do this content thing. So I couldn't be like 6 months later, yeah, I just suck at this. So I was like, I'm just going to keep working at this until we get good at it. And we're starting to get good at it.
And that applies to everything. Like, if you're starting a business, do not, go in stealth and don't be afraid to tell anybody. Like, I mean, if you're building deep tech and that sort of thing, yeah, keep some stuff hush-hush. But, be, with your friends, with your colleagues, with your team, tell them what the vision is and what you're going to achieve. Because that fear of public embarrassment, that will motivate you more than anything else can, to some degree.
Yeah, I tricked myself into learning Chinese in 30 days earlier this year because I told a bunch of my friends I was going to do it. And then about halfway through, I was miserable. And I was like, well, but I've told all my friends that I'm going to learn Chinese in 30 days, so I have to just stick to this challenge. And because I thought it would be like a 4-hour-a-day thing. I just didn't know what I was doing. I ended up studying 12, 14 hours a day, every day. But at the end of 30 days, I took and passed the official fluency test for Mandarin Chinese twice, actually, because I thought I'd failed it the first time. And I only stuck with it, actually, because I was so embarrassed that I'd told so many people I was going to do it, that I was like, I can't quit now.
Okay, so you said that the biggest mistake that you made in your 20s, now you're in early 30s, so biggest mistake you made in your 20s was that you kept waiting for a certain level of success before you allowed yourself to be happy.
Yep. Yeah, I think we did this content actually just on a random Q&A, and it wasn't a scripted answer, it was just a live answer, and it was just the first thing that came to mind, which was that I spent most of my 20s thinking I'm okay struggling now because one day I will be happy. And I had all those things above the bed, the car, the vacations, everything, and I was like, I'm waiting for those things to come into my life to allow myself to be happy. And I did all the things. I got the money, I bought the cars, we traveled the world. But when I look back, I realized that I didn't actually need to defer my happiness. And I think I just had a wrong understanding of what it means to be in the struggle. I think if I could do it again, I wish I could go back and say, I'm in a struggle now, but I know I'm working towards something meaningful, and I'm going to allow myself to be happy in this moment. And I was really fine deferring happiness, and I would say I'm really glad that I sold the company when I did at 31 and not at 61, because I would have also then realized at 61 I just deferred my happiness for 40 years for nothing. Selling the company, you're happy for. People told me it would last a week or two. It did last a year. It lasted a pretty long time of happiness. But eventually it goes away, and then you're like, what's next? And I think that's when you have to do the deep work and say, I'm not chasing this North Star. I need to learn to be happy in the moment now. And I wish I could go back. I can't, but I can at least share that. And I try to be. I think one of the things that I try to do with my content is just be really real about the mistakes I made, and that was a huge one. I was just deferring my happiness for no reason.
And for us that are busy, stressed, under insane amounts of pressure from investors or customers or whoever, and we're trying to build something, and when we sit down to play video games or chill or watch TV, and we don't want to do it because, it feels like we're wasting time. How can people balance happiness with going for it?
I think I used to actually force myself to play video games every now and then just to try to be like, this is what I should do to take a break. I don't know if that's the right answer. I think what I try to do now is take a step back and just say, whatever I'm going through right now, I'm very privileged to be a part of. It's so dumb, but I'm a part of this group called PEF. It's all post-exit founders, like 1,500 of us. We all sold our companies for way too much money. All anyone does, and I stopped going to the meetups, because all they do is talk about the good old days. What it was like when it was 7 people in a room and investors hated you and no one wanted to invest in your company. Everyone is like looking back on those golden days. And I think you will be out of that situation one day and all you'll do is look back. Like for me, my favorite part of running the company was when we were 4 people. We were just in this little crappy office, just like nothing was working, but it was special in a way that I don't get to relive anymore. And I think you can actually just take a step back and be like, these are special times. Let's actually just enjoy this. And it's going to be painful, but it will be worth it. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think that's an amazing note for me to end on. So I'll hand over to I think, Sam or Gabe, and we'll do some Q&A. So if you've got a question, now's the time to ask it. I think just beforehand, let's give Michia a big hand, but let's do it on a little video together. Why don't you stand up and we'll film a little clap. Everyone get in, squeeze into the video, and go nuts for Michia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Go. Thanks, man. All right. Questions. Who's up first?
All right. So we have 10 minutes for question. So we start here, then we're going over there.
You mentioned about the car, the poster in your bedroom. What was the car?
It was a white Porsche 911. And then, I bought it in 21. Great car, by the way.
There we go. Next question.
Yeah, your vision board was that car and rooftop. It's all very materialistic. And obviously your vision was to earn lots of money. Again, very materialistic. Did you have any other goals you're aspiring to, which were more like spiritual or helping others, making the world a better place? Was it all about the money and the car and the rooftops? And then did that change since you've sold the company? Are your goals still very materialistic or a bit more, helping others or other things you're aspiring to?
Yeah. I would say, so one, I'm actually part of the Founders Pledge, which I think is a really cool organization. You should check it out. You basically pledge away your money early on. So it's about the opposite of materialistic. So we give to a lot of important causes. For us, things that really matter to us are international. So we tend to give international, whether it's building schools and things like that. As far as my goals, I was sort of torn between things that would motivate me and things that were meaningful. So about half of the things on the board were more like treating friends, retiring my parents, all these other things that I've done. Since then, and I will say, like, the materialistic thing is I grew up going to soup kitchens and shelters, so I think I also like earned my stripes to go chase cash, and having achieved that, now I don't think about money at all. I think that's the most important thing, is I wanted to get enough money to not worry about money, and literally I probably spend $50,000, $60,000 a year making content for no financial gain whatsoever. So now it's actually, this is like my way to try to give back and just share what I've learned.
Excellent. We have one more here, then going there and there.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for the inspiring talk today. I really appreciate that. I can relate it to in many reasons. My name is Adriano from Unlivery. So my question to you is really about, as a founder, what was the biggest challenge that you faced scaling up the business, and how do you know when to pivot? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll answer the pivot question quicker because it's easy. I actually think you can be really data-driven about pivoting, which is essentially assuming you are selling something, which is most businesses. It's either close rate or retention. And if one of those is like pretty far off from industry benchmarks, it could be that your process is bad. What actually happened was we improved our offering to a point where all of a sudden our demo close rate went from like 3% to at peak it was about 40%. And I was like, oh, this is what winning feels like. And I just didn't know that until we actually had a better offering. What was the first part of your question? Because it was a deeper one that I wanted to answer.
Yeah, the biggest challenge that you face?
Yeah, so biggest challenge. The biggest challenge, and this is like such a dumb mistake that we made, but I thought that I would raise venture capital money and then hire a great VP of sales and that they would figure out how to sell this product of ours. And most of my founder friends were like, you kind of only get one VP of sales mistake, because if they come on board, they work for 6 months, 6 months later, you're like, this isn't working, you fire them, you don't get enough traction to raise your next round and you just die. I missed 3 times. I kept hiring the wrong VP of sales. I'd build the sales team underneath them. It wasn't working. You lose the VP of sales, and then you usually lose your sales team. And this is so dumb, but like literally 4.5 years into running the company, I said, I'm going to figure this thing out. So I ran the sales team for 6 months, and we had like maybe 20 customers at that point. It was okay, but not great. Like $600,000 in revenue roughly. And I said, I'm going to figure this thing out. And I ran the sales team for 6 months. I hired and fired the people. And then after that, I was able to then say, I know exactly what my VP of sales needs to do. I know what skill sets they need. I know what they need to spend their day doing. I'm going to go hire that exact person. That person that I brought in crushed it immediately because I had done the job and I knew what I was looking for. And I think in the next 2 years, we would have gone from 20-ish customers to about 900 because I actually figured it out. And I was like, I spent 4.5 years sticking my head in the sand and saying, what you're supposed to do is hire experts, so I'm going to go hire experts and raise a bunch of money. And that didn't work at all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, great. So one more question here. And then there.
Again, also, thank you for making the time tonight. It was really helpful. You spoke earlier around having systems in place so that people wouldn't burn out. But what are your top 3 tips to make sure that you, your co-founders, and then separately also, your top people, your most important people, didn't burn out and didn't suffer from depression, which I think everyone sort of goes through?
Yeah. On the co-founder stuff, the thing that I think was really important was trying to actually maintain that relationship. If you look at the data, co-founder breakups are one of the top causes of failure in startups, and I think people don't talk about it enough. And me and my co-founder, we had sort of ups and downs in that relationship. And at the end of the day, we would like try to go on founder dates where we just go grab dinner together regularly. At one point, and again, it's almost, people often compare it to a marriage. So we got like a therapist that we would meet with, and he would sort of like intervene between us. One of our advisors, who was a close friend, called us together and said, listen, guys, this is really toxic. We need to get you guys in a room. And when we sold the business, we were actually on really good terms. But I think we had to really actively work on that. And we just, even if we were not on the same page, we were sort of mad at each other. We cared more about making it work than like being right. And so I think we, now married, we just celebrated 5 years a couple months ago. And it's sort of the same thing where it's like, I think no one told me how much active work marriage is, and it's awesome, but it's not something that if I just ignored it, it would just sort of die over time. And I think your co-founder relationship is the same way. And call in the therapist, whatever you need to do. For the team, well, I'll say for myself, because for myself it was really important actually. I had different levels of protecting myself. Level 1 would be, I'm just sort of having a bad day. I would just leave the office. I'd go grab a coffee. Usually I'd put on this playlist called Peace by Spotify, and I would just like sort of go for a walk. Level 2 was like, I'm really freaking out, and I would leave the office for the day. And I normally wouldn't, don't ever tell your team you're freaking out. I would just be like, hey guys, I need to go take care of something, and I would just sort of like get out. Because I knew if I was in the office, it would be more disruptive, because they would see the CEO freaking out, and then they're gonna start freaking out. Level 3, which the last time it happened was right before we sold the business. It was August 2020. I'd gone out to raise a Series B, pitched 50 firms, had 8 partner meetings, 0 term sheets. And I was like, I need to get out of here. I'm freaking out. And I just left for a week. I went up to go hiking and just chill. And I only did that like 2 or 3 times in the 6 years running the business. But sometimes I just needed to get away. And I said, don't call, don't text. My EA has my wife's number. If you really need me, you'll get in touch. Otherwise, just handle it. And I actually came back from that trip having failed to raise the money and was just able to fix my mindset. And within 2 weeks had raised the money we needed, made some changes to the business, and then sold it 4 months later. But I think if I had not done that, the business probably would have gone under because I was just like freaking out. So I was really aware that I need to protect my own mind because this whole thing can go crumbling if the CEO is freaking out publicly and making bad decisions. So that's sort of how I thought about it.
Okay, great. We have one more question here.
Thank you. Thank you. You mentioned that you saw a lot of founders quit before the company actually is dead.
Yes.
And my question is, how can you tell that a company is dead, given that founders are usually stubborn and try to keep going as much as they can?
Yeah, I think you see it. So I would see it often in these sort of like late night car rides is where I first started seeing it because we were going down to Palo Alto and then coming back late at night, like 11 p.m. And we'd sort of just talk about how it's going. And over time, people just sort of let it slip. No one ever said I quit. It's that they started looking at roles. They started sort of not putting in the work. And at Alchemist, for fundraising, we had a rule. You had to do 10 meetings a week. And we would just see it was like 16, 12, 4, 2, 2. And so they're just doing enough to say, well, I met with investors this week and no one's interested. But they weren't doing as much as they could. In my demo day, I think there was 21 companies. We raised 5.4 million. The second company went and raised like $1 million, and then the 19 went under. Like, it was really brutal demo day. So I just watched a lot of them. The crazy thing was they had better metrics than us, and they just like stopped believing somewhere. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned that you had this, I guess, going back to like your vision board and your posters, that you kind of dreamed of what it's like with selling your company, especially given that like VCs are going for like those moonshots, those $1 billion companies and stuff. Did you start the company with the exit in mind originally, or was that something that you kind of adapted over time?
Yep. So we did something that was really anti-VC and considered very unsexy in Silicon Valley, which is we built a company actually the way venture studios build companies, which is they look at like what is the exit path, what is the plan, and they kind of have a business plan from start to exit when they start the company. Ironically, that's the way that like best capital investors perform, but venture capitalists have these like fantasy notions of everyone's building Facebook and things like that. So when I started pitching VCs, I used to tell them, hey, we did a spreadsheet. We think this is a good market. Like, we think we can build an exit really efficiently. And they all hated it. So I stopped telling them that story. I was really deliberate on trying to be a part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, but not get caught in the Silicon Valley machine, which is basically like it's either $1 billion or you're a loser. And I have friends that sold for a lot more than us in Silicon Valley and just sort of feel like failures. And I just really tried hard to like stay grounded and be like, no, if we sell even for 50, like to me, that's a ridiculous win and like life's gonna be great. So I just tried to not get caught in the ecosystem hype. But I will say the idea that we were chasing had the potential to be $1 billion business, which allowed us to raise VC capital. But it was never our intention to actually build a multi-billion dollar business. We would have pulled the parachute earlier if we could. And so when 110 came to us, we were like, this is pretty good, let's take it. And the VCs got good returns. So like, they were all fine.
Hi. So if you're starting your business today, would you do something different? And do you think is it possible to do to achieve the same level of success without being obsessed about it, and how to build without the obsession, maybe if it's possible.
I don't have any tips on how to build without being obsessed. I also don't have any tips on how to become obsessed. I think it's like, if you had asked me when I was running the company, I would have wished there was a pill you could give me to make me less obsessed. Because I remember, the worst one is I remember we went to Hawaii, and it was like this beautiful vacation. All I could think about was the problems in the business. And I would have given anything in that moment to not be doing that and to be present with the dolphins and the turtles and everything, but I wasn't. How I would build today differently. I have this sort of current thesis that I shared for the first time this morning over coffee with a friend, so you'll hear it for the second time, which is I don't think venture capital is as necessary today, because basically when you raise venture capital, you're trying to de-risk building the product and selling the product. And you need salaries for both of that historically. But with the AI automation today, I think you can do with one engineer and some good AI tools what you used to need 5 engineers for. And on the sales side, I think you can do with one salesperson what you used to need 5 salespeople for. So I would be using AI automation to build really lean go-to-market teams with a really simple product team and a really simple go-to-market team. Potentially that's the same team. And I'd be hyper-focused on getting like to product market fit while staying quite lean. And I think because we were selling enterprise software, that historically, when we built the company, wasn't an option because those AI automations weren't as available. So that's probably what I would do differently. I would just be really trying to not get bloated, be really efficient using AI. And then once you have product market fit, you can decide if you want venture capital or not, but you may not need it, frankly.
Right. We're pretty much done with the time for Q&A. I'm just going to allow one last question. Let's make it short.
Wow, no pressure there. Last question. I don't think I can live up to it. But yeah, some really good questions, and thanks. It's been amazing. The thing you mentioned about obsession, and I love that you employ this idea of finishing 5:30 and not going over. But in those early days, can you draw back to remember when you're starting your own thing, there's so many things to think about, right? It's the product market fit, the legal requirements, doing, marketing, finding the right bit. There's so many things. How do you deal with that overwhelm, or did you find it overwhelming? And as you go further along, obviously new things come in, like dealing with staff. Does that overwhelm get easier, or do you just learn to be better at being overwhelmed?
I think you get better at triaging. So rather than saying I have 18 things to do, hopefully, I think it's a survival mechanism. You will have to say, there's 18 things I could do, but here's the 2 that really matter today, or here's often the 1 that really matters today. And I think early on, maybe you're worse at triaging what that is. But I don't think you get better at dealing. I don't think the overwhelm goes away. Not until you're probably 80 people. So when running the company at 200 people was actually the easiest thing ever, because it was like, there's executives that have directors reporting into them, and I just kind of check in with them every now and then. But up until then, I think it actually just gets harder. And the hardest part is usually 20 to 40, because you're just small enough to like not be able to hire great executives to run everything, but you're so big that you're being really stretched as CEO. So that's where a lot of companies break, is just that like 20 to 40 stage. I don't think it gets easier. I just think you get better at it. And then it gets easier way later, when it's already like, well, we're successful now, so who cares if it's easier? Like, I wanted this 3 years ago.
Excellent. Well, everybody, can we give a round of applause to Michia? Thank you so much. It was great, very insightful. Great.